Property investors, whether you are a Liverpool-based property investor or not, this video is important for you. Now, what I'm going to be talking about in this video is the landlord licensing scheme, which is actually due to be coming back in April 2022 and could also be rolled out in other parts of the country in the future. Now, in 2015 to 2020, Liverpool brought out the landlord licensing scheme, which was basically a scheme to keep track on the amount of landlords that there were in Liverpool, as it was an increasing number, but also to make sure that they are being compliant and providing safe housing. Now, during that 5-year period that they ran the landlord licensing scheme, they actually carried out a total of 34,000 inspections. And off the back of those inspections, they found that over 65% of properties weren't even fully compliant. To add to that, 4,350 of those were actually categorized as a stage 1 or 2 hazard, which means they weren't fit for purpose. Now, of course, that is exactly why they brought this licensing scheme in, and means that they can keep track on the amount of landlords there are, but also the quality of the housing that they're providing. Now, shortly after I became an investor in 2019, they actually scrapped this landlord licensing scheme. So I'd become an investor myself. I bought my first buy-to-let property. I'd paid the fee for my landlord licensing scheme, and then literally 2 weeks later, they scrapped it. They canned it with no need for one. So as you can imagine, I got my refund. Thank you very much. But it was the government that actually made the decision to scrap the scheme. Now, the Liverpool mayor at the time, Joe Anderson, not to be confused with the new Liverpool mayor, Joanne Anderson, can you believe it? Actually said at the time that this was incredibly short-sighted of the government and put vulnerable tenants at great risk. But just before we move on to what is coming in 2022, I think it's important to actually talk about what was previously there. So what was previously available was a Liverpool-wide licensing scheme in which every landlord had to register to be part of this scheme. I think it costs between £200 and £300 from memory. And although irritating to lose that off of your profit per year as you renew that membership, I think it's an important thing for the city because it means that new investors coming in, they know they have to provide good quality housing. And perhaps any older landlords that are thinking of retiring, they're not so fussed about being in the game anymore, perhaps it pushes them into selling their properties quicker. And then the new investors can come in, they can put more time, effort and money into treating the tenants in the right way. But overall, I think it is an important thing for the city. It's just something as investors that we have to consider because it comes straight off of our profit margin. So now let's look at the new landlord licensing scheme, which is due to come in April 2022 and is set to stay for 5 years. Now, this time around, it's not coming for the whole city. It's coming to 16 areas within the city. I'll show a little map here on the screen, which, as you can see, these are kind of the mid to the northern parts of the city, which I believe are considered to be the highest density areas for landlords, private investors. So the scheme itself hopes to tackle the following things, which is poor electrics and the danger that comes from those. It's the fire safety regulations, because again, not all landlords are providing adequate smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors, etc. But also damp within properties, which, as you know from the older style properties, particularly within northern cities of the UK, damp is quite a common thing. And last of all, antisocial behaviour, which is said to contribute towards poor health and mental well-being. So to add my opinion, I do have to agree it's a positive move. If these areas are particularly run by private investors and landlords and the houses aren't being maintained to a high enough standard, then this needs to be addressed, it needs to be tackled. And by bringing this licensing scheme into play, if more inspections are carried out, the chances are landlords are going to look after the properties more, they're going to look after their tenants more. Hopefully it results in the future, more capital appreciation, more growth, because the areas become more desirable and people are looked after. So the cost of this licensing scheme hasn't yet been disclosed from what I can find online or find through my research. But What I imagine and what I predict based off of previously is it will probably be in the ballpark of £200 to £300 per annum and will just continue to renew. Now, this landlord licensing scheme, of course, has been brought into Liverpool. It's a Liverpool initiative, but is backed by the government. They have overall approval on it, and therefore it's something that they may well look at doing in other large cities that have a similar issue. Now, at present, there are over 50 different councils within the UK that have some kind of licensing scheme, of course at different levels. At the moment, they're more focused on HMOs and the social housing side of things, but that doesn't mean that they might not change their tune in the future and bring this out to all landlords. So the question is, do you think this is a good move? Do you think it's a positive thing or a negative thing? Drop a comment below, let me know your thoughts. I appreciate you watching, and of course, I'll see you in the next video.